Romans chapter 5, verse 1, you just had this read, but we're going to dig into it, so we're going to read it again. Therefore, since we have been justified through faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Good news. That's awesome. Through whom we have gained access by faith into this grace in which we now stand. And we boast in the hope of the glory of God. So Paul's saying you get to walk around, you get to say, I'm excited about my eternal future. I may not be excited about my next few days, but I'm excited about what's coming. I have some reason to be happy. I have some reason to celebrate. Things are good. It's kind of what Paul's getting at. Things are pretty good for me. Now, the problem with that is as soon as you say things are good, there's someone reading or listening that like, well, things aren't good for me. I mean, maybe things are good for you, and that's great, but how come nobody's acknowledging my problems and my issues? And Paul does that in the very next verse. He says, not only do we boast in the hope that we have, but he says we glory or we celebrate in our sufferings. Because we know that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance produces character, and character, hope. It's a great passage. This is a good one. If you're one of those people that likes to highlight and underline, this is one that you should highlight. It's a sequence of realities that can produce something good that we wouldn't expect to. And I know we've read verses like this, and we kind of are aware. I talked about this a couple of weeks ago when our dads told us that, hey, hard things build character. We kind of have these notions running around. And so, we don't want to, but we understand that sometimes in life there's difficult things, and sure, if we try hard enough, we can glean some lesson from it. That's kind of how we feel about verses like these. How many of you remember the trash compactor scene in Star Wars: A New Hope? Yeah. Okay. All right. There's two people. That's all right. Let me set it up for you. They get on the Death Star, disguise themselves as stormtroopers to rescue Princess Leia. Escaping stormtroopers, they dive down this chute and end up in this garbage dump. What they don't realize initially is that it's not just a garbage dump. There's some scary monster in there, but also it's a trash compactor and the walls start to close in. You remember this scene? I remember being a kid watching it and it kind of like getting me a little like anxious, that anxious feeling. The Greek word for suffering that we just read in Romans is trash compactor. Not quite literally, but that's what it means. It means to squeeze or compress or narrow. That's the feeling of suffering. That's what it's talking about. It literally means to narrow. I was listening to someone a couple of weeks ago describe. It was a podcast, and they were describing what severe anxiety feels like. There's someone who struggles with anxiety, diagnosed anxiety, and for which they take medication. But they said anxiety feels like a pressure that restricts your world and narrows your choices until it feels like you have no options left. Sounds like being stuck in a trash compactor. Suffering, anxiety. Now, I think all of us can relate, at least on some level, even if you're not diagnosed with something, you can relate to the idea that life can feel kind of crushing. Like there's times where you want good news and you get bad news, and it just feels like your legs got swept out from under you. Maybe you have uncertainty about work, where you heard a rumor or somebody in another department got laid off, and you're like, uh-oh, I don't think I'm very important here. Could that be me next? And I just started hearing that little knock in the engine of my car, and I can't afford to lose my job. And what about the health insurance? And it can feel like you're being crushed. Or maybe you have a relationship. It could be a boyfriend, could be a girlfriend, could be a marriage, could be a friendship. And you thought everything was great, but then they did something weird that made you question, is it really great? Are things really good? Did I misunderstand something? And it feels narrowing and uncertain. Health stuff, parenting stuff, just the endless expectations of life. It feels like the walls are closing in and you're on the Death Star. 2 weeks ago, or I guess 3 weeks ago now, we started a series called Bent Not Broken. And the idea is that life is going to be difficult. There are going to be challenges, and there's some surprising truths about suffering, about this narrowing, about this constricting of our lives. There's some surprising truths. And the first one, you remember, if you can remember that long ago, life is harder than we think. And I'm not saying set your expectations super low, but it is. It just is. It just is harder than you think it's going to be. It's just more difficult. However hard you think it's going to be, something's going to happen that is harder than you thought. Secondly, we talked about suffering alone doesn't produce character, that it's not just the fact that you suffer, because people suffer all the time and don't learn anything from it and don't grow from it. And we talked about this counterintuitive idea found in Scripture that life can be found in death, and death maybe should be in quotes, that when we walk into something that feels like suffering, there is a way to find life there. And that was from a few weeks ago. Romans 5 is this amazing passage about suffering, but it offers 3 mental shifts in the face of that pressure, that narrowing, that constricting. 2 of those mental shifts are patterns of thinking that we have to give up, that you might have now that you have to let go of. And one of them is a pattern of thinking that you probably don't have that you have to take up. So 2 patterns of thinking that we have to give up, 1 that we don't have that we have to take up, and all 3 feel counterintuitive. Number 1, easier is not always better. Easier is not always better. We know this. Easier is not always better. But the problem is it's so baked, this idea that it's so baked into us, we don't often consciously think about it. When you're faced with a decision, there's some decisions you make just subconsciously. You make them. You don't even give any thought or consideration. You just make them. When I use GPS to guide me somewhere and it tells me, oh, here are your options, I don't think about, should I take the longer route or should I take the faster route? I always choose faster. Does anybody choose longer? Anybody like, oh, you know what? I want to be in the car longer. Oh, it looks like there's a traffic jam this way. I'm going to take that route. No, we just automatically, I don't even know why they offer the longer route. Maybe there's a reason that I don't know, but I would never. And I can't even imagine a scenario that I would take the longer route. Some of you are like, well, what if you get to your destination too early and it's awkward and it's a party and you don't want to go up and knock on the door 30 minutes before? You know what you do is you get there early and then you just circle the neighborhood until it's time, or you park down the street. That's what I do. You'd be crazy not to do the short, fast thing. But we all know that sometimes harder is better. We all know that. Food made from scratch versus food thrown in a microwave. I was talking to somebody that used to work at, I think it was Applebee's, and they were like, yeah, we microwave about 95% of that stuff. That's all microwave. And that's why Applebee's is not a place you should celebrate your 25th anniversary, because it's not better. A few years ago, my wife and I went on a trip to, it was for our anniversary, and we wanted to drive up the Pacific Coast Highway between L.A. and San Francisco. It's a beautiful drive. But you can actually get from L.A. to San Francisco in about 5 hours on this road, on I-5. Beautiful. Maybe that, yeah, oh, wow, how lovely. I mean, look at those billboards, and it's just what a wonderful view. Or you can take twice as long, and you can drive up the Pacific Coast Highway. Right? Which one is better? It's obvious, right? The longer, harder, more difficult route in this case is better. The Amish folk get a bad rap. There's lots of Amish people in Iowa where we lived before we moved up here, and so you can see buggies all the time on the road. You'd have to watch out for them. And they I think they get a bad reputation. And I mean bad reputation in the sense that, like, you're like, oh, how quaint. They're from another era. They don't use technology. There's no cell phones. There's no electricity, no modern amenities. But if you've ever been in a place where there were a lot of Amish living, you know that's actually not true. Did you know that? It's actually not true. Have you ever purchased like an Amish-made piece of furniture? If you go to the Amish workshop, guess what they have in the workshop? Electricity. And you're like, wait a second, I thought that was the whole thing. No, you can have it in the workshop. My father-in-law used to drive for the Amish people, and they would actually buy the vehicle, they would own the vehicle, and then they would pay him to drive it because they couldn't drive the vehicle themselves. That was against the rules. Now, some people look at that and they're like, oh, it's super hypocritical. You can't do that. That's not okay. That's not the way that this works. But they get a bad rap, and this is why. The Amish people are not opposed to technology. Did you know that? They're not opposed to technology. What they're opposed to is the impact technology can have on their way of life and their community. That's what they're opposed to. So every time there's a new technology that comes along, they get together. Now, every Amish community is a little different. This is not monolithic. Everybody's a little different in how communities different in how they navigate this. But they'll get together, the elders, the leaders, and they'll say, is this a technology that we want to allow into our community? Is this going to benefit us, or is this going to make things worse? And so, evidently, electricity in the house, no, but electricity in the barn, yes. And there's reasons for that. There's reasons for how it impacts the way that they're living. They don't assume that new or easier is automatically better. Think about this, does this new thing whose stated purpose is to make our lives easier actually make our lives better? So in their case, buggies, yeah, sure, makes our lives better. Cell phones, evidently not. How many of you wish you could kind of go back and unring the bell on certain technologies that you've allowed into your lives and family? Yeah. Don't you wish that at the outset of some of these things you had said, hey, let's sit down and let's really think about whether or not this thing is going to make our lives better. And let's decide that before we allow it without discrimination into our family and into our lives. And it's because it's so hard to undo. It's so difficult. So maybe they're onto something. Easier is not always better. But to do something the hard way is to deliberately choose a form of suffering. And if our reflex is always to avoid suffering, then when we unthinkingly choose the path of least resistance, we're going to miss out on something that might actually be good for us or best for us. When we're just automatically making decisions, easy, shorter, let's do this quickly, sometimes we'll lose out or miss out on things that are actually good for us. The lessons in life that I have learned the deepest were the ones that were the hardest. The ones that stuck with me the most were not the things that were easy. The easy life, the one that we all kind of unthinkingly strive for, produces the weakest people. Worst of all, this desire for ease brings us into direct contrast with following Jesus. I mean, he said it so many times in so many ways. He said it again and again and again. One of the ways he said it was in Matthew chapter 7, verse 13. He says, enter through the narrow gate, the constricted way, the way of pressure. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. Many enter into it. They don't even think about it. There's not even any curiosity about, should we go this way or this way? Easy way it is. But he says, but small is the gate and narrow. That word narrow is literally the same word as the word suffering in Romans 5. Wide is the way that leads to destruction. Suffering is the way that leads to life. This is what Jesus is saying. So when we just don't even give it a second thought and we're like, let's do it the easy way, let's do it the fast way, let's do it the shortest way, we're sometimes missing out on the way of Jesus. The way of Jesus will never be the path of least resistance. Number two, happier is not always the goal. This is important for me. Happier is not always the goal. What is happiness? What even is happiness, Abigail? I don't know. Exactly. Yeah. What is happiness? When you think about happiness, what is it that comes to mind? I imagine for some of you, maybe you think about a memory from when you were young and you were like riding your bicycle down the street and there's not a care in the world and you maybe learned to take your hands off the handlebars and you just the wind in your hair and you're just like, this is what it means to be happy. Maybe it was a roller coaster. Maybe it was a beach. Maybe it was just being around a table with family and nobody was bickering or arguing. Maybe it was you were by yourself and nobody was around and you're like, this is my happy place when everybody leaves. When Thomas Jefferson wrote those words in the Declaration of Independence that we were free to pursue happiness, what are we pursuing? What is that happiness? Maybe a better way to think about this, or not better but easier, is when you have the thought, I'm not happy, what are the circumstances that cause you to conclude that? What's missing? If you've ever thought, I'm not happy, you've got this guy to thank. I know, you might not know who this guy is. He looks a little bit like Benjamin Franklin, but this guy's name is Jeremy Bentham. And he's a utilitarian philosopher, and his thinking deeply influenced the Enlightenment era, including guys like Thomas Jefferson, of whom he was a contemporary. He wrote this. Think about this, and this is in that old school way of, but very, very articulate. Nature has placed mankind under the governance of two sovereign masters, pain and pleasure. It is for them alone to point out what we ought to do. So think about what he's saying. There's only two things you can do, things that bring you pain or things that bring you pleasure, and that should be the only thing determines how you live. That's what he's saying. Whatever makes you happy is what is right. On the one hand, the standard of right and wrong. So think about this, morality. On the other, the chain of causes and effects are fastened to their throne. They govern us in all we do, in all we say, in all we think. And so his conclusion was, you should do what makes you happy. That is what is morally correct. This is Jeremy Bentham's idea. And he defined happiness literally as anything that brings you pleasure. And then he went on to say, and you might have heard this, but whatever makes the most people happy is right for society. And that's how we should govern society. That was his idea. Happiness is the highest pursuit. But that actually hasn't always been the case. There was a gentleman who wrote a history of happiness. This is so interesting. Darren McMahon wrote a history of happiness. In medieval thought, happiness was a gift from God, bestowed in your life from God, and likely only to be experienced in the afterlife. They did not, in the Middle Ages, they did not expect to be happy here on earth. And you can imagine, like the average lifespan was 45. I would have been like an ancient elder in the village. But no, there's no anesthesia, there's no modern dentistry. Like you can imagine, oh yeah, life is not going to be happy. We're just going to be miserable. Hopefully the next life is better. You can see that. In Greek thought, this is like Plato, Aristotle, those guys, happiness was defined as a sort of contentment, and it was the byproduct of virtue. Meaning if you did good things, you experienced the sort of contentment that they defined as happiness. This is so fascinating. In biblical thought, and this is up for debate a little bit because of etymology and the subjective nature of definitions. But in biblical thought, there's not even a word for happy. Do you know that? Anytime you read happy, it's just sort of a modern word that they've interjected into the scriptures. There's words like fortunate, there's words like glad and rejoice, but there's no word to describe something outside of God that is that sense of being carefree and just loving life. It's just not what they were thinking about when they thought about life. So in other words, happiness, the way we think about, the way we conceive of happiness is a modern idea. It's relatively new. The thing that drives most Western humans is a new idea. And so we've got this ideal of happiness to which nobody is actually measuring up, and everybody is unhappy. Have you ever seen those happiness reports, different countries that it's self-declared, and it's always like Finland or Norway, and you'd be like, we're Minnesota, that's about as close as you can get to Finland or Norway and not be those countries. You'd think we would be right up there, and I think we're pretty high when it comes to the 50 states, but most people in America are not happy because their definition of happiness is all over the place and changing, and as soon as they achieve whatever they think it's going to make them happy, the definition moves. This is the problem with our modern ideas of happiness. There's been a ton of sociological work countering Bentham's idea. There's a bunch of books. I did not read all these books, but these are all books that the thesis of which is like, hey, happiness is not the main goal in life. If I could distill all these books, it would be something like, we have lost the old knowledge that happiness is overrated. This is Peggy Noonan's quote. I think we have lost the knowledge that happiness is overrated. We are the first generation of humans who actually expected to find happiness here on earth, is what she says. The reason is, think about this, and the search for it has caused unhappiness. The reason is, if you do not believe in another higher world, and you only believe in the flat material world around you, then you are not just disappointed when the world does not give you a good measure of its riches, you are despairing. These books, the books that I just showed you, the basic idea is that our modern definition of happiness is flawed, it's too narrow, and it's exploited for capitalist purposes. You were happy until you saw that commercial. You were happy until you saw that person that bought that thing that now that you want that thing because it means that they're happy and you could be happy if you have that thing too. John Stuart Mills, another contemporary Jeremy Bentham, said, he goes, if you ask yourself whether you are happy, you cease to be. So true. It's like when you overfill a cup of coffee and you're like, oh, I'm going to spill this. If you focus on that cup of coffee, what's going to happen? You're going to spill it. But if you just walk normally, you'll probably be fine. Paul's words weren't always counterintuitive to society. When he says we glory in our sufferings, that wasn't always a counterintuitive idea. It's counterintuitive to our modern ears. I think Paul might say, if you're asking the question, am I happy? You're asking the wrong question. And asking that question will make you unhappy. He might say, based on Romans chapter 5, a better question is, am I growing? Am I learning? Am I elevating the people around me? Am I stewarding well the things that God has given me? Number three, suffering is the only path to better. Suffering is the only path to better. This is a fun sermon, isn't it? Yeah, we get to, don't be happy, suffer. Every good experience you've had had some suffering involved in it. Every good experience you've had. So if what makes you happy is your whole family being around the table, sharing dinner together and everybody being in a good mood, there was some suffering that was required to get to that point. Some things that you had to go through, the family had to go through, or if nothing else, somebody had to prepare the meal. Somebody had to work to make this happen. A delicious meal requires preparation. A satisfying life requires hard work. A concert that you enjoy required years, decades of practice for that person to be able to perfect their gift. My daughter Avery and Noah, and there's others in the room, but Avery and Noah just had their graduation on Friday. And it was a good moment, I think, when they got done and they moved. I don't know why you moved the tassel from one side to the other. Is there a reason? But it's a big event. You may now move your tassel. And everybody's like, okay. If you have your tassel on the left, that means you're an adult, I guess. And then at the end, they all throw their hats in the air, and it's just like this. It's joyous. It's celebratory. It's a good moment, right? We love that. We love to celebrate it. I will say, this is pretty funny. One of Avery's teachers, Noah, you may have gotten this too, but they got a little booklet filled with teachers' quotes. And one of the teachers, I just love this. He's the history teacher, which is maybe why he wrote this. He wrote, "Congratulations on finishing the easiest part of your life." Isn't that good? You're like, yeah, okay. But it's still, you celebrate. And even a graduation is the result of teachers who went to school and parents who drove and picked up and dropped off. And it's just years of homework. That diploma to celebrate requires suffering. It can't be avoided. And the Bible constantly points to this causal, am I saying that right? Causal? That doesn't sound right. Correlation, causation. The Bible constantly points to this causation connection between suffering and character. This cool psalm. Let me show you 3 psalms that are all kind of in the same vein. Psalm 119:67. He writes, "Before I was afflicted, before I suffered, I went astray. But now I obey your word." And then a few verses later, he writes, "It was good for me to be afflicted so that I might learn your decrees." And then another few verses, I put the wrong text up there. It's 75 verses instead of 67. "But I know, Lord, that your laws are righteous, and in your faithfulness you have afflicted me." That this affliction, this suffering is good. The good news is, for us, is none of us have to actively seek opportunities for hardship. They are around every corner. You do have to ask the question, what can I learn? how can I be shaped, or how is God shaping me? Logan Ritchie, our children's minister, is going to be teaching a class over the summer that talks about, I can't remember the title, The Anxious Generation, is that right? I think by an author by the name of Jonathan Haidt. Great author. I've read some of his other stuff, and he has a book about happiness, and he writes this in this book. He writes, people need adversity, setbacks, and perhaps even trauma to reach the highest levels of strength, fulfillment, and personal development. And some of you are like, well, great, I should be an awesome human because my life has not been easy. Susan David, a Harvard psychologist, said discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. So it's not even just the Bible that's saying this. It's people who study how human life and brains work. But there is a danger to this suffering. It's not certain that we're going to learn anything from it. I've told this story before, but maybe you've forgotten. When Liam was probably 5 or 6 years old, there was a box, and you know how kids are. When there's a cardboard box, whatever was in the box doesn't matter. You could get them the most awesome Christmas gift ever, and the box is going to be the thing that they play with. There was a box, and you could almost see the wheels turning. He pulled the box up to the top of the stairs. It's about a set of 8 stairs, carpeted, and he got in it. We're watching this. We know. And then he got back out of it, and he went to his mom, and he's like, hey, if I ride down the stairs, will I crash? And Corrine said, I don't know, which is true. We don't know what will happen. I think maybe Liam was expecting her to say, yeah, it's unsafe, so don't do it. But that's not the type of parent Corrine is. She's like, yeah, see what happens. Might as well. She goes, I don't know. You could crash. And we didn't know. We thought maybe, his weight would be right and the distribution and the physics of all of it. So he goes back up, and I know what he's thinking. He's thinking this is going to be so much fun. I'm going to get in this box, and I'm going to slide down the stairs, and the wind will be in my hair, and I will experience that joy that we get from adrenaline coursing through our veins, or however any of that works. So he gets in the box. He shifts his weight forward so that the box, the gravity starts to pull him down the stairs, and then immediately tumbles all the way down the stairs like a stuntman, just limbs flailing down the stairs. And he gets to the bottom, and he's understandably upset. And he gets up, and he looks at us, and he this is what he says to us. He goes, why did you do that? Why did you do that? And we're like, buddy, we didn't do that. But we have learned some pretty important lessons here today, haven't we? About gravity and physics and, right? We didn't say that. But it was funny to me later that he was okay and he hadn't broken any bones yet. It was funny to me that he made this choice. He was even warned that it could result in suffering, and he was still mad at mom and dad. That feels like a lot of adults, right? God, why did you do that? God's like, I didn't do that. You got yourself in that mess. God, why? Now, there are things that we have no control over, and I understand, and there's a whole thing we could talk about there, and there's some great books written on that. But here's the danger. Here's the danger. If you don't allow suffering to be refining, it devolves into resentment. And this is why some people go through suffering and they're elevated as a human. They become a more compassionate, sympathetic, open-minded, a better person. And there's other people who go through suffering and they shrivel and shrink into themselves and they develop a bitterness, a resentment. See, resentment is that simmering anger that life is not what you wanted or expected it to be. And it's always under the surface for people that have placed their whole faith in a definition of happiness that cannot be fulfilled. Resentment is mad at the world, and it's mad at God for allowing the world to be this way. Resentment will eat you alive, and it will damage the people in your life. Resentment is why some people suffer and grow, and other people suffer and shrivel. And I'll just tell you what, you're suffering maybe to a greater degree than anybody else in this room. That may be possible. But the truth is, if you start playing the suffering comparison game, you're going to find that your life is a whole lot better than somebody else's who came out of it pretty good. I don't think that there's any upside in playing that game. Everybody is going to suffer. Everybody's going to have hardship. Everybody experiences disappointment. Everybody does. And the question is, what are we going to do with that? It's not how do we run away from it, but what is it going to shape in us, or what are we going to allow God to shape in us through that? I'm going to ask the praise team to come up, and I'm going to read Romans 5, 3 through 5 once more and recap what we've been talking about. Romans 5, 3 through 5, Paul writes, not only do we glory in these good things like grace and faith and favor, but we also glory in our sufferings, our narrowings, the trash compactor on the Death Star. Because we know, Paul writes, we know that suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance character, and character hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Easier is not always better. Happier is not the goal, and fixating on it makes us unhappy. Suffering is the only path toward what we actually want in life.